The Galactic Council chamber was vast, its walls glowing with the soft blue light of floating energy crystals. The most powerful leaders of the galaxy sat in their hovering seats, their expressions calm, yet filled with silent judgment. At the center of the chamber stood Ambassador Hale, a human representative, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. He had just finished speaking. He had just told them about Valis IV, a colony of 3 million humans, men, women, children, wiped out, not in battle, not in self-defense, massacred. The ones responsible, the Zorvax Dominion, a powerful empire of insect-like creatures known for their brutality. They had burned everything. Cities turned to dust, ships destroyed in orbit, civilians executed without mercy. The few survivors that managed to escape spoke of horrors too terrible to describe. And yet, the Galactic Council's response was silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chancellor Varric, a tall, gray-skinned being with cold, reptilian eyes, spoke. His voice was smooth, emotionless. "We understand your pain, Ambassador Hale. However, war is not the answer." Hale's hands trembled. He had expected this. He had hoped for something different. But deep inside, he had known. The Council never cared about humans. Not the answer. Hale's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the chamber. 3 million dead. The Zorvax broke every treaty, ignored every law. And this is what you say. A bird-like diplomat from the Arthan species clicked its beak. "We must be cautious. The Zorvax Dominion is a strong force in the galaxy. An open war could destabilize the balance of power." Hale let out a bitter laugh. Balance of power, that was all they cared about. He turned to the representatives of other species. Some looked away, avoiding his gaze. A few, like the armored form of the draconian warlord, nodded in silent approval. Others, like the pale-skinned diplomat from the Thyraxian Alliance, simply watched with unreadable expressions. Then came the final insult. Chancellor Varric leaned forward. Humanity must show restraint. Hale's breath caught in his throat. Restraint. His mind flashed with images. The burning cities of Valis IV. Families crushed beneath rubble. Ships filled with refugees, shot down before they could escape. The screams. And now, they were telling humanity to show restraint. For years, humanity had played by the rules. They had signed the treaties, obeyed the laws, and even forgiven past betrayals. No more. Hale straightened. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and cold. No more talks. No more warnings. He met Varric's gaze, holding it. Only war. The chamber exploded into chaos. Shouts of protest, murmurs of agreement, fear, anger, it all mixed together. But Hale didn't wait. He turned and walked out. Behind him, the Council argued, but their words no longer mattered. Humanity had made its decision. The war machine awakens. In the cold depths of space, the Terran Defense Force received the signal. Within minutes, thousands of warships prepared for battle. Factories on Mars, Titan, and beyond shifted into full production. Earth's greatest minds worked on new weapons, new ships, new strategies. This was not a war for expansion. This was retribution. The Zorvax Dominion had made one fatal mistake. They thought humans would stay silent. But now, the galaxy would learn the truth about Deathworlders. A deep silence filled the command deck of the TSS Warhammer, one of humanity's most powerful warships. The massive battleship hovered in deep space, its dark metal hull blending into the void. Admiral Rael stood at the center of the command room, staring at the holographic display in front of him. The time had come. The Galactic Council had refused to act. The Zorvax Dominion had committed mass murder and walked away without consequences. But now, humanity would speak in the only language the Zorvax understood: war. Rael turned to his officers. His voice was calm, but filled with purpose. "Begin Operation Stormfist." With those words, humanity struck back. A strike like lightning. Across the galaxy, hidden human fleets emerged from dark space. The Zorvax supply lines, once thought to be untouchable, came under immediate attack. Massive stealth bombers, invisible to most scanners, dropped kinetic rods from orbit, huge metal projectiles that fell like meteors, smashing into enemy space stations and fuel depots. Within hours, 5 major Zorvax military outposts were reduced to nothing but fire and wreckage. Their fleets, unprepared for such a fast assault, scrambled to respond. On the surface of Zorvax 7, a vital weapons factory world, the insectoid workers rushed to sound the alarms. But before they could react, human drop pods slammed into the ground like thunder. From inside the pods, elite Terran shock troopers emerged, clad in heavy armor, moving with terrifying speed. Their weapons were precise, their attacks relentless. Every Zorvax soldier in their path fell within seconds. The factory, one of the biggest in the Dominion, was captured within 30 minutes. The war had truly begun. Fear spreads across the stars. News of the attacks spread quickly. The Zorvax Dominion, which had ruled through fear for centuries, was suddenly on the defensive. Their generals could not understand. How had humanity moved so fast? How had their supply lines been destroyed so easily? The Galactic Council held an emergency meeting. The alien representatives were in shock. This is madness," cried an Arthan diplomat. "They struck without warning," shouted a Verathian senator. "No," came a voice from the shadows. The room fell silent as Warlord Kazakh of the Draconians stepped forward. His massive, scaled form radiated power. He had always respected humans, and now he could not hide his admiration. "They did warn us," he said, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. "We just didn't listen." The council had no answer. The Dominion's response. Deep within the Zorvax homeworld, Queen Zithkar watched the reports with growing rage. Her claws dug into the stone throne as she listened to her failing generals. "The humans move too quickly, my queen. Their attacks are unpredictable. They fight with no fear, no hesitation." Zithkar let out a low hiss. She had underestimated the Deathworlders. That was a mistake she would not make again. She stood, her towering form casting a shadow across the chamber. "Mobilize the Grand Armada," she commanded. "If the humans want war, we shall give them war." The war was only beginning, and humanity was just getting started. The Galactic Council chamber was in chaos. Shouts echoed off the high crystal walls as diplomats from every major faction argued with each other. Screens flickered with live war reports. Burning Zorvax supply stations, destroyed fleets, and entire colonies falling under human control. It had been only 5 days since humanity launched their attacks, and already the Zorvax Dominion was suffering devastating losses. No one had expected humans to move this fast, to strike this hard. At the center of it all, Chancellor Varric sat on his elevated throne, his gray reptilian face tense. He raised a hand, demanding silence. "Enough," he snapped. The chamber quieted, though murmurs of fear still filled the air. His sharp eyes scanned the room. "We must act before this war spreads further. If we do nothing, the balance of power will be destroyed." An Arthan diplomat, his blue feathers ruffled, let out a high-pitched whistle. "It is already destroyed. The humans are relentless." A Verathian senator slammed his fist on the table. "We warned them. We told the Deathworlders to show restraint. They refused." From the shadows, a deep chuckle filled the room. All eyes turned to Warlord Kazakh of the Draconian Empire. His armored form leaned forward, his golden eyes gleaming with interest. And why should they show restraint? His voice was a low growl. They were attacked first. Their people were slaughtered. You demanded that they accept it. You expected them to kneel. Instead, he gestured at the burning battle reports. They reminded the galaxy why Deathworlders should never be provoked. Silence. No one could argue against the truth in his words. Chancellor Varric sighed, rubbing his temples. We must force a ceasefire before the Zorvax dominion collapses completely. The Arthan diplomat scoffed. You still wish to protect the Zorvax? After what they did. Varric's voice was sharp. This is not about the Zorvax. This is about balance. If the humans win this war completely, they will become the dominant power in the galaxy. Do you truly believe they will stop after this? A long silence followed. That was the true fear. Humanity had been treated as lesser beings for decades, forced into unfair treaties and denied power in the Council. Now they had proven their strength, and if they won, would they ever stop? The Council's secret plan. Later, in a private chamber, Varric stood with two of his closest advisors. The room was dark, the air heavy with tension. What do we do, Chancellor? One of them asked. The humans will not listen to words, and if we interfere with force, they may turn against the Council itself. Varric narrowed his eyes. Then we must ensure that they lose this war. His advisors exchanged nervous glances. How? One asked cautiously. Varric's cold gaze settled on the holographic map. We have allies. The Zorvax may be finished, but there are others who fear human power as much as we do. We will give them what they need: ships, weapons, intelligence. He straightened. If humanity wants war, we shall give them an enemy they cannot defeat. Dissent in the Zorvax ranks. Meanwhile, on the Zorvax capital world Zorkalis, the mood was grim. Inside the massive war hall, Queen Zithkar sat on her throne, her black eyes burning with fury. Before her, her highest generals knelt. Their forces were in shambles. Their fleets were crippled, their supply lines destroyed. And worst of all, their allies had abandoned them. One general, his exoskeleton cracked from battle, spoke hesitantly. My queen, we must consider surrender. A sharp hiss cut through the air as Zithkar's clawed hand lashed out, striking the general across the face. He fell to the ground, trembling. We do not surrender, she snarled. We are the Zorvax. We have ruled this galaxy in fear for centuries. We will not bow to primitive Deathworlders. But even as she spoke, doubt flickered in the eyes of her generals. The humans were not primitive. They were something else. Something unstoppable. Zithkar refused to accept it. The Grand Armada is still intact, she declared. We will launch a counterattack. We will show these humans that they are not invincible. Her generals obeyed, but deep inside, some of them wondered, what if she was wrong? Humanity's growing power. Back on Earth, the leaders of the Terran Defense Force, TDF, studied the battlefield reports. Everything was going according to plan. Fleet Admiral Voss stood in front of a massive star map, watching as red enemy territories shrank with each passing day. Beside him, General Kale, leader of the Terran ground forces, crossed his arms. The Zorvax are running out of options, Kale said. Another few weeks, and they'll break completely. Voss nodded but did not smile. He had fought too many wars to celebrate this soon. The Council won't sit still, he said. They fear us now. They will find a way to strike back. Kale exhaled sharply. Let them try. The two men looked at the map. Humanity had suffered. Humanity had been ignored. But now, the galaxy had no choice but to acknowledge one simple truth. Deathworlders had arrived, and they were here to stay. The war had entered its most dangerous stage. Across the stars, the Zorvax dominion was losing ground at an alarming rate. What was once an empire feared by many was now a crumbling ruin. Human warships pushed deeper into enemy territory. Their attacks swift and precise. Every battle was a lesson. And the humans never lost the same way twice. Inside the command center of the TSS Warhammer, Fleet Admiral Voss stood with his hands behind his back, staring at the holographic war map. Red zones marked Zorvax-controlled systems. Every day, more of those red zones turned blue. A communications officer turned to him. Admiral, our forces have secured Zorvax 9. No survivors on the enemy side. Voss gave a slow nod. Good. Begin the next phase. No delays. The officer hesitated. Sir, reports indicate some Zorvax units are trying to surrender. Orders. Voss's face was unreadable. Did the Zorvax show mercy to Valis IV? The officer lowered his gaze. No, sir. Then we move forward. The war was no longer about victory. It was about justice. A nightmare on the battlefield. On Zorvax 12, one of the last major strongholds of the Dominion, the ground trembled under the weight of battle. Terran shock troopers, clad in exo-armor and equipped with advanced rail rifles, moved through the ruined streets like ghosts. A group of Zorvax warriors, their kitten-covered bodies trembling, tried to hold their position inside a collapsed building. Their leader, Commander Silkar, watched through a broken window as the humans advanced. Hold the line, he hissed to his soldiers. They bleed just like us. But deep inside, he knew it was a lie. The humans did not break. They did not slow down. One of his warriors screamed as a high-speed rail slug tore through his body, cutting him in half. Another explosion rocked the building, sending Zorvax soldiers flying. The humans moved like predators, their weapons firing with deadly precision. Silkar clenched his mandibles. They had mocked humans for years. They had called them primitives, weak, and unworthy of respect. But now, they were learning the truth. Deathworlders did not run. Deathworlders conquered. A desperate counterattack. Back on Zorkelis, the Zorvax homeworld, Queen Zithkar paced angrily in her throne room. The holographic display in front of her showed battle after battle lost. Her generals stood silently, afraid to speak. They had failed her. Zithkar's claws clicked against the stone floor. Deploy the Grand Armada. One of her advisors hesitated. But my queen, if we use the Armada now, our last defenses will be weak. Her eyes flashed with fury. Are we not already weak? She growled. Launch the counterattack now. Within hours, the Grand Armada, a massive fleet of Zorvax warships, launched from hidden strongholds. Their target, Earth itself, the battle for Earth. The attack came without warning. Zorvax warships emerged from hyperspace just outside the Sol system. The Terran defense grid, a network of orbital defense platforms, activated immediately. Missiles and laser turrets locked onto enemy ships. Inside Earth's military command center, alarms blared. General Kale watched the screen, his face hard as stone. Scramble all planetary defenses, he ordered. We stop them here. Within minutes, hundreds of Terran warships raced toward the invading fleet. Fighters screamed through space, dodging plasma blasts. Human battleships, reinforced with heavy armor, crashed into enemy lines with terrifying force. The battle was chaos. Zorvax ships fired their energy lances, tearing through smaller human ships. But humanity had one advantage. They adapted. The moment their ships started falling, human commanders adjusted tactics. Swarm attacks, flanking maneuvers, precise targeting of weak spots. The tide turned within hours. The Zorvax fleet, which had come to destroy Earth, found itself surrounded and outmatched. One by one, their ships fell. The Grand Armada, the last hope of the Zorvax Dominion, was crushed. The galaxy watches in shock. The battle was over. Earth stood unbroken. The Terran fleet had destroyed the Zorvax's greatest military force. Across the galaxy, news of humanity's victory spread like wildfire. The Galactic Council watched in silence, unable to deny the truth anymore. Humanity was no longer a species they could ignore. They were now the strongest military power in the galaxy. Some council members, like Warlord Kazak, were impressed. Others, like Chancellor Varric, were terrified. We must act now, Varric whispered to his advisors, before it's too late. The war was not over. It was just beginning. The destruction of the Zorvax Grand Armada sent shockwaves across the galaxy. No one had ever imagined such an outcome. The once feared Zorvax Dominion was now a dying empire, its fleets shattered, its homeworld vulnerable. But as the flames of war spread, another force was moving in the shadows. The Galactic Council, watching humanity's unstoppable advance, had made a decision. They would not sit by and let the Deathworlders become the new rulers of the galaxy. They would stop humanity before it was too late. A secret meeting in the dark. Deep within the heart of the Galactic Council's headquarters, the most powerful leaders of the galaxy sat in a darkened chamber. The air was thick with tension. At the head of the table, Chancellor Varric studied the holographic war map. The Zorvacs were finished, but humanity's forces were still expanding, taking over one system after another. "They must be stopped," he said, his voice cold. "If we allow this to continue, humanity will become the dominant power in the galaxy." A Varathian senator leaned forward. "But how do we stop them? The Zorvacs were one of the strongest empires, and they were destroyed within weeks." From the shadows, Warlord Kazakh of the Draconians let out a deep chuckle. "You should have listened when I warned you." His golden eyes gleamed. "You underestimated the Deathworlders, and now you fear them." Varric ignored him. He turned to his advisors. "We must unite the remaining factions against humanity. We give them weapons, intelligence, ships, everything they need." The Arthan diplomat frowned. "You want us to start a war against the Deathworlders?" Varric's face darkened. "This is not war. This is survival." The council chamber was silent. Then, one by one, the leaders nodded. An unexpected ambush. Far from the politics of the council, in the depths of space, humanity's fleets continued their advance. On board the TSS Warhammer, Admiral Voss stood in the command center, reviewing the latest reports. The war was nearly over. The Zorvacs' homeworld was surrounded. Their forces had been reduced to scattered remnants. Victory was only days away. But then, disaster struck. Incoming ships detected. A radar officer shouted. Voss turned sharply. "Zorvacs reinforcements." The officer's face went pale. "No, sir. Multiple fleets, from different factions." On the holographic display, dozens of enemy warships appeared. Their markings were not Zorvacs. These were ships from several alien empires, the same factions that once stood neutral in the war. The realization hit Voss like a hammer. The Galactic Council had betrayed them. Before he could react, the enemy fleets opened fire. The battle for survival. The first barrage slammed into the human fleets. Explosions tore through the ranks as entire ships were ripped apart. Humanity had been prepared for a long war, but they had not expected an ambush from multiple species at once. Across the fleet, commanders scrambled to organize a defense. On the bridge of the TSS Warhammer, alarms blared. Officers shouted orders, trying to regain control. Voss clenched his fists. "All ships, defensive formation. Do not let them break us." The humans fought back fiercely. Their railguns roared, sending high-velocity slugs tearing through enemy shields. Missiles streaked through the void, detonating against hostile warships. But for the first time in this war, humanity was outnumbered. A draconian battleship smashed through the lines, its plasma cannons melting through human armor. An Arthan dreadnought unleashed a devastating energy beam, vaporizing 3 Terran cruisers in an instant. Voss gritted his teeth. This was not a battle. This was an execution. But humanity did not surrender. A last stand. On the surface of Zorkalis, General Kale and his ground forces had been preparing for the final attack against the Zorvacs' capital city. But as the news reached them, everything changed. "The Council betrayed us," Kale muttered, staring at the sky as enemy ships descended like vultures. A lieutenant ran up to him. "Sir, we have new orders from High Command. We are to hold this planet at all costs." Kale exhaled slowly. "Then we fight." The skies above Zorkalis turned into a battlefield as enemy drop pods rained down. Council-aligned forces, including Draconian war beasts, Varathian snipers, and Arthan shock troopers, landed in the ruined streets. But humanity was ready. Terran forces dug in, their rail rifles glowing as they took position. Heavy artillery units fired from hidden bunkers, ripping apart incoming enemy forces. Tanks rolled forward, crushing opposition under their treads. The battle for Zorkalis had begun. A message to the galaxy. As the war escalated, the truth spread across the galaxy. The Council had turned against humanity, not to protect peace, but to protect their own power. But the galaxy had changed. Species that had once feared humans now watched with admiration. Many had been oppressed by the Council for centuries. Now they saw humanity as the one force strong enough to challenge that power. On the occupied planet of Rithos 3, a small rebel group gathered around a holoscreen, watching the news. They saw humanity's fleets fighting against impossible odds. They saw humans refusing to back down, even when betrayed. A young rebel leader clenched his fists. "The Council has ruled us for too long," he whispered. "Maybe it's time for a new power in the galaxy." Across dozens of worlds, whispers of rebellion began to spread. Humanity was not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy. The war had changed. It was no longer just humanity versus the Zorvax. Now, the entire Galactic Council had turned against Earth. Multiple alien fleets had attacked without warning, trying to crush humanity before it became too powerful. But instead of breaking, the Deathworlders did what they did best. They fought back. The battle for Zorkalis continues. On the surface of Zorkalis, the ground was shaking. Explosions tore through the ruined streets as human soldiers and their armored vehicles fought against the Council's invasion forces. General Kale stood atop a destroyed building, his rail rifle glowing in the night. His radio crackled with reports from his commanders. Enemy drop pods are landing in Sector 7. Verathian snipers on the rooftops, requesting air support. Kale exhaled. Hold the line. No retreat. His eyes flickered toward the burning sky, where the Terran fleet was still battling against impossible odds. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned, but they would not fall. The Council thought humanity would break. They were wrong. The Galactic Council's fear. Back at the Galactic Council's headquarters, the situation was tense. The alien leaders watched as battle reports came in. Human forces should have collapsed by now. They should have been overwhelmed by the combined fleets of the Council. But instead, the Deathworlders were holding their ground. Chancellor Varric slammed his fist on the table. How are they still standing? A Verathian general shook his head. Their strategies are unpredictable. They adapt too fast. Their soldiers don't break under pressure. The Arthan diplomat hesitated before speaking. Perhaps we underestimated them. Warlord Kazek smirked from the shadows. "I told you fools this would happen." His golden eyes gleamed. The humans do not fear death. They do not fight for power. They fight because they refuse to be controlled. Varric's hands trembled. "Then we must end this now. Call in our reserves, every last ship, every last soldier." He looked at the holographic map, where the battle for Zorkalis raged on. Humanity must be destroyed before they change the galaxy forever. A desperate gamble. On board the TSS Warhammer, Admiral Voss studied the latest battle data. His fleet was still intact, but losses were mounting. The Council had sent more reinforcements, and soon, humanity would be overwhelmed. They needed a new strategy. Voss turned to his officers. "If we keep fighting like this, we'll be worn down. We need to change the rules of the battle." His second-in-command, Commander Hale, frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Voss's expression was grim. "We go after their leadership." Hale's eyes widened. "You mean the Council?" Voss nodded. "If we take out the Council's control center, their entire chain of command will collapse. Their fleets won't be able to coordinate. Their forces will fall into chaos." It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only way to win. The rise of rebellion. Across the galaxy, the Council's betrayal had not gone unnoticed. Many alien species had suffered under their rule for centuries. Now, as they watched humanity refuse to bow, something changed. On the industrial world of Rithos 3, a group of rebels gathered in a hidden base. Their leader, a scared Varethian named Jektalos, stood before his people. "The Council has ruled over us for too long. They taxed our worlds. They controlled our lives. But look at the Deathworlders. They refuse to be controlled. They refuse to kneel." The crowd murmured in agreement. Jek raised his fist. "The time has come. We will rise. We will fight." The Council is not invincible. Across dozens of planets, similar uprisings began to take shape. The Council had made a mistake. By trying to destroy humanity, they had inspired a revolution. The final attack begins. On board the TSS Warhammer, the battle plan was finalized. Humanity would launch a direct assault on the Galactic Council's headquarters. It was risky. It was insane. But it was the only way to end the war. Admiral Voss stood on the bridge, his voice steady. "This is it. The Council thinks they control the galaxy. Today, we prove them wrong." The fleet prepared for the jump to hyperspace. The final battle was about to begin. The war had reached its final stage. The Galactic Council, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, had turned its fleets against humanity. They had sent their strongest armies, their deadliest weapons, their most fearsome warriors. And still, humanity stood tall. But now, it was time to end this war. Admiral Voss and his fleet had one objective: destroy the Council's headquarters. The battle for the galaxy had begun. The final attack. Inside the TSS Warhammer, alarms blared as the fleet prepared for battle. The entire ship trembled as hyperspace jump sequences activated. Admiral Voss stood firm on the bridge, watching the countdown. "All ships, prepare for immediate engagement. No hesitation. No mercy." His officers saluted. The fleet vanished into hyperspace. Moments later, they reappeared over the Council's homeworld, Aetheria Prime. It was a sight to behold. Massive golden towers rose into the sky, surrounded by thousands of enemy ships. The Council had fortified their world, expecting an attack. But they had not expected this. A full Terran armada had arrived. The space around Aetheria Prime exploded into chaos as human warships opened fire. The Council's last stand. Inside the Council's command chamber, Chancellor Varric stared at the battlefield in shock. "How did they find us so quickly?" he shouted. An officer responded, panic in his voice. "The humans. They knew. They planned this." Varric clenched his fists. "Then activate the planetary shields. Deploy every last ship." Across Aetheria Prime, defense platforms powered up, aiming their cannons at the incoming fleet. The Council's warships charged forward, desperate to stop humanity. But the humans were ready. Terran warships broke through enemy lines, moving like a storm. Railguns fired. Missiles locked onto targets. Explosions lit up the void. One by one, Council ships fell. The once mighty fleets of the Council were being wiped out. The invasion of Aetheria Prime. As the battle raged in space, human dropships descended toward the planet's surface. Thousands of Terran soldiers, armed and ready, stormed the Council's capital. General Kale led the charge. His boots hit the ground as he stepped out of the dropship, his rail rifle in hand. Around him, human soldiers moved like shadows, clearing streets, taking out enemy forces. Council forces tried to fight back, but they were unprepared. They had spent centuries ruling through fear, using politics and manipulation. They had never faced an army like this. Kale raised his fist. "Push forward. Secure the Council chamber." Terran tanks rolled through the streets, blasting enemy positions. Heavy infantry squads tore through defenses, using precision strikes to neutralize opposition. The city burned, and humanity marched forward. The fall of the Council. Inside the Council's chamber, Varric and the remaining leaders locked the doors. They had nowhere to run. The sound of gunfire and explosions grew louder as human soldiers advanced. The doors shook as charges were placed. Then, boom! The heavy doors collapsed inward, and Terran soldiers rushed inside. General Kale stepped forward, his rifle aimed at Varric. "It's over." Varric's hands trembled. "You don't understand. If you destroy us, the galaxy will fall into chaos." Kal's expression was cold. "No, the galaxy will finally be free." With that, he gave the order. The council fell. A new era begins. The war was over. The council, which had controlled the galaxy for centuries, was gone. The remaining factions surrendered, realizing that resistance was useless. Across the galaxy, news of humanity's victory spread. On Rithos 3, rebels cheered as they tore down the council's banners. On dozens of planets, enslaved species rose up, overthrowing their oppressors. And on Earth, people watched the broadcasts, knowing that their kind had done the impossible. They had fought the entire galaxy, and they had won. The future of humanity. Months after the final battle, Admiral Voss stood in front of a massive crowd on Earth. The people had gathered to hear the future of humanity. Voss took a deep breath before speaking. "The war is over, but our mission is not." The crowd fell silent. "The galaxy is changing. New alliances must be made. New enemies may rise. But one thing is clear: humanity will never be ruled by fear. Never again." The people cheered. The age of the council was over. The age of humanity had begun.